The sword that chose no one on the planet. Xenthara, under 2 red moons and a sky filled with lightning clouds, stood a sword no one could lift. It was called the Blade of Destiny. The sword was ancient, older than any alien record. It stood in the middle of a black stone circle buried deep in the mountains of fire. The blade shined silver blue, with symbols glowing on its surface. The handle was made from an unknown metal that never rusted, never broke, and never bent. For 800 years, the greatest warriors from across the galaxy came to lift the sword. All of them failed. Strong aliens, smart aliens, even machines. None could move it, not an inch. Some believed the sword was cursed. Others believed it was testing them. But slowly, hope died. The blade became a story, a place of honor. No one believed it could ever be lifted. Then one day, a ship crashed nearby. It was not a royal alien ship, not a warship. It was small, damaged and strange, and inside it was a human. His name was Jack Ryker, a deep space explorer who had lost his way after an ion storm. His ship landed hard, burning through the trees and landing not far from the stone circle. When he stepped out, aliens came to see. They wore armor and long capes. Their faces were thin, with glowing eyes and tattoos that moved like ink in water. They looked at Jack and laughed. He's too small. He doesn't even have scales. Why is his skin so soft? Jack didn't understand their language, but he could guess the meaning. He smiled and raised his hands. "I come in peace," he said. "I just need help fixing my ship." But they weren't interested in helping. Instead, one alien warrior pointed to the stone circle behind him. "Let the soft one try the sword," he said, grinning. The others laughed louder. It was a joke to them, but Jack's eyes locked on the sword. He saw it standing tall in the center, silent, powerful. For some reason his heart skipped a beat. He felt pulled to it. "What is that?" he asked. The alien priestess standing nearby in silver robes spoke slowly in galactic common. "It is the Blade of Destiny. It chooses its master, but it has chosen no one." Jack looked again. Something about it called to him. "Has anyone tried kneeling?" he asked softly. The crowd laughed harder. "Kneel? It's not a god?" one shouted. But Jack didn't care. He stepped forward. The aliens moved aside, still laughing. The priestess narrowed her eyes. Jack walked into the circle. The air felt heavier, hotter, like the stone itself was watching. He stood in front of the sword, just inches away. The blade hummed quietly. Jack could feel it in his bones. He took a deep breath and knelt. The laughter stopped. The sword made a soft noise, like wind cutting through metal. Jack placed his hand on the hilt. It felt cold yet alive, like touching water that could breathe. He closed his eyes. The sword whispered something. A feeling more than a sound. Something old. Something lonely. He pulled. Nothing happened. He pulled harder. Still nothing. Then, just for a second, the sword glowed. A faint blue light ran across its blade, and the stone circle shook, just a little. Dust lifted into the air. The crowd gasped. One alien dropped his drink. The priestess stepped forward, face pale. Jack opened his eyes, confused. "Did it move?" "No," she said quietly. "But it answered." Jack stood up. His hand shook slightly. He looked at his palm. Strange glowing symbols had appeared, burned into his skin. "What is this?" The priestess looked horrified. "You have been marked." "Marked for what?" Jack asked. She didn't answer. She simply turned to the crowd. "Take him. Lock him away. He must not touch the sword again." Guards grabbed Jack roughly. "Wait! I didn't do anything." But it was too late. They dragged him away. Behind him the sword stood silent again. But it was glowing, ever so faintly. The sword had chosen no one for 800 years, but today, it had reacted. To a human. To him, and Xenthara would never be the same again. Laughter echoes in the circle. They dragged Jack through the halls of stone, past glowing alien fire lamps and carved walls full of forgotten history. His arms were tied with silver bands that felt too heavy for their size. Every alien he passed stared at him, some with fear, others with hate, but most of all, with confusion. No human had ever touched the blade of destiny and made it glow. Was taken to a cold chamber deep underground. It wasn't a cell, but it wasn't a room either. Just a space with no windows and only one strange blue light above. He was alone, but he felt like something was watching. And far above him, the alien city of Veltor buzzed with voices. Did you see it glow? No one has ever seen that. He's just a human. It must be a trick. But in the grand circle, where the sword still stood, the high priestess knelt before it in silence. The sword hadn't glowed in centuries. Not for her, not for kings, not for chosen warriors, but for this lost, dirty explorer. She stared into the blade's reflection and whispered, "Why him?" Meanwhile, Jack sat on the cold floor, staring at his palm. The marks burned softly, like they were alive. Symbols. Not random, not decoration. They shifted when he blinked, as if they were waiting. He stood and placed his hand on the smooth wall. Okay, what the hell is happening to me? Just then, the wall opened, not a door. Just a ripple in the stone. A shadow stepped in, tall, hunched, and wrapped in a robe of cracked leather. An old alien, skin pale and wrinkled like tree bark, stared down at him. You knelt before the sword. Jack narrowed his eyes. Yeah, was that wrong? No one has done that in generations. They all came with pride. You came with silence. Jack scratched his head. I just felt something. Like the sword was sad. The old alien raised an eyebrow. You felt the sword? Jack nodded. I think it felt me back. The alien looked at him carefully. Then he pulled out an ancient object, a black cube covered in dust and runes. He placed it on the ground. It opened with a hum, showing a projection of old symbols and a human shape. Jack stepped closer. Is that me? No. This was recorded 600 years ago, a prophecy of a being who would not lift the sword with strength, but with spirit. Jack was quiet. The old one continued. The blade of destiny is not a weapon. It is a judge. It waits for a soul it can trust. But why me? Jack asked, voice low. The alien closed the cube. That only the trials can answer. Trials? Jack repeated. You have been marked. The sword has chosen you to begin the trials of worth. If you pass them, it will rise. And if I fail? The old alien didn't blink. Then it will kill you. Later that night, in the city square, a gathering was called. All the major houses, tribes, and elders appeared. The news had spread. The human had been chosen. In the center of the stage, Jack stood again. This time not as a prisoner, but as a challenge. Guards pushed him forward. Bright lights above made him squint. 1,000 eyes watched him. Whispers filled the air. He's just a traveler. He doesn't even carry a weapon. His people are weak. He'll die in the first trial. But one voice, clear and loud, spoke over them all. It was the priestess. Let it be known, she said, that the human has been marked by the blade. The law is clear. He must be tested. Her tone was cold, but her eyes watched Jack too, closely. Tomorrow, under the moons, he begins the trials of fire, ice, and soul. Let the sword decide. And once again, the laughter returned. Louder, crueler. Jack stood in the center, surrounded by enemies, alone, marked. And tomorrow, he would face something that no living being had survived. Still, Jack did not flinch. In his heart, Something deep had awakened. Not fear, but curiosity. The sword had spoken, and it wanted more. The first tremble. The twin moons of Xenthara hung low in the sky, one blood red, the other pale white. The night air felt heavier than usual, like the world was holding its breath. In the valley of ancient stones, the fire pits blazed high. Alien banners flapped in the wind. The crowd gathered once more, standing behind the black stone circle that held the sword. But this time, no one laughed. The human had been marked. And tonight, he would try again. Jack Ryker stood, just outside the circle, eyes fixed on the blade. His chest burned slightly. The glowing marks on his hand had spread, now trailing up his arm like living fire. They didn't hurt, but they didn't feel natural either. A guard leaned toward him. "This is your last chance to run." Jack gave a small smile. "If I ran, the sword wouldn't be interested in me." The crowd watched closely as he stepped into the circle. Their voices dropped to whispers. Some hoped he would fail. Others secretly hoped he wouldn't. The priestess stood with arms crossed, silent and sharp-eyed. Jack reached the center and stopped just in front of the sword. It still stood the same, tall, proud, and unmoved, a relic of a forgotten age. He took a deep breath and knelt once again. The wind shifted. Jack closed his eyes. The world fell quiet. Then, he touched the hilt. It was cold at first. Then it felt alive. The symbols on his arm pulsed. Then the sword hummed. The sound was low, like metal remembering something ancient. The stone beneath Jack's knees trembled. Gasps broke out from the crowd. He gripped the hilt harder, lifting with his whole body. His muscles screamed. Sweat poured from his brow. Then, a flash. The sword glowed bright blue for a moment, so fast, some blinked and missed it. But the energy wave that followed was impossible to ignore. The circle of black stone cracked. Just a little. Alien children screamed. Warriors drew weapons. The sword did not rise, but the ground shook. Jack was thrown back, landing hard on the stone. Silence fell. Everyone stared. The sword was still in place, but now glowing faintly with pulses of light. Jack groaned and sat up. His nose bled slightly, but he was alive. The priestess stepped forward, her voice sharper than ever. "That was not lifting. That was a sign of imbalance. He is not worthy." An elder stepped forward. The stone cracked. The blade responded. No one has ever made it react twice. The council began arguing. Some were angry. Some were afraid. But Jack wasn't listening, because something was whispering to him. He turned and looked at the sword again. The blade's glow was no longer random. It was pulsing to the beat of his heart. Back in the temple, they locked Jack in a resting chamber. He lay on a stone bed, staring at the marks on his arm. They had spread to his chest. He placed a hand over his heart. "What are you doing to me?" Suddenly the door hissed open. A new figure entered, tall, armored, and silent. A female alien with white eyes and skin like stone. Her name was General Avara, commander of the High Guard. She studied Jack like he was a strange weapon. "You should be dead," she said. "The pulse from the blade could kill 10 soldiers." "Lucky me," Jack replied. She narrowed her eyes. "You're not lucky. You're connected." She stepped closer. "No one survives the trials. They were made to destroy the unworthy. But now, the sword calls you forward." Jack sat up. "So what's next?" She handed him a small glowing ring. "Tomorrow, the first trial begins. Fire." "Trial of fire?" Jack asked. "Yes. And if you fail, your bones will be all that remains." She walked out, leaving Jack alone again. But Jack didn't feel alone. The blade's voice, once faint, was now a heartbeat in his mind. Calling. Waiting. Ready. The first trial would not be a test of strength. It would be a test of survival, and the sword had already tasted his spirit. The real challenge was just beginning. Secrets of the Forgotten Temple. The sky turned black before dawn, not with night, but with smoke. Fires burned in sacred pits outside, the stone city of Vaeltor. Warriors danced in circles. Drums pounded like war hammers against the silence. The trial of fire was coming, and only one name was spoken across the cliffs and towers: the human. Jack Ryker stood in a stone hallway, breathing slowly. His chest was bare now, tattooed by the glowing marks from the sword. The symbols had reached his neck. They pulsed like stars. Not painful, but heavy. Ancient. He stared ahead at a huge door, sealed with chains of living metal. Beside him, General Avara held a torch made of blue flame. "This is the Temple of Origin," she said quietly. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Where the sword was made?" "No," she replied. "Where the sword was abandoned." The door creaked open. A deep heat rolled out like breath from a dragon. "Your trial lies within," she said. "If you survive, you move to the next. If not—" She didn't finish. Jack looked down at his hands. They still shook from yesterday's tremble. But deep inside, he felt a strange calm. "Let's find out," he whispered, and stepped inside. The Forgotten Temple was not just stone, it was alive. Walls glowed with ancient words. Floors shifted slightly like breathing skin. Shadows moved where there should be none. At the center of the chamber burned a ring of fire. Inside that ring stood a black cube, and nothing else. The flames rose high, almost to the ceiling. Jack stepped forward, and the fire grew louder as if it knew him. Then a voice, one that echoed from the walls themselves, spoke in a forgotten tongue. But Jack could understand it. "The flame burns all that is false." Suddenly, images burst from the fire, flashes of Jack's memories. Earth, a dead crewmate, a promise broken. He gasped and stepped back. "No," he muttered. "Not now." But the voice returned. "Face your truth or burn." The flame surged. Jack was pulled into the circle. Inside the ring, the fire did not burn his skin. It burned his soul. He saw himself again, alone in space, ignoring a distress call that could have saved another ship. "I was scared," he whispered. The fire pulsed. Another image, his brother on a hospital bed. Jack had missed the final goodbye. "I didn't make it in time." The fire pulsed again. Then he saw himself kneeling before the sword. But in this image, he turned away. Left it behind. Cowardice. Failure. Regret. Jack dropped to his knees. The fire was inside his chest now. "I'm not perfect," he said aloud. "I ran, I failed, but I'm here now." Silence. The flames stilled. Then they turned blue. The fire lowered, pulling back like an ocean wave. The floor below shifted and revealed the black cube at the center. Jack reached out and touched. Suddenly the sword's hum returned, but now it was louder, clearer, like it was breathing with him. The cube glowed and opened, revealing a shard of crystal, glowing gold. The voice whispered again, softer this time. "First truth accepted. Flame endures you." Outside, the watchers waited. The priestess stood silent, her hands clenched. "He's been inside too long," one elder said. "He's gone." But then the doors opened, smoke poured out, and Jack walked through it, alive, covered in ash, holding the crystal shard. The crowd gasped. Some stepped back in fear. The priestess stared, voice hollow. He passed. Jack looked at her directly for the first time. "No one survives the trial of fire," she said. "I'm not no one," Jack replied. Then the ground beneath the sword shook again, just once. A pulse, a heartbeat, and on its blade, a new mark appeared, one that matched Jack's. The sword was remembering him. The first trial was over, but deeper ice awaited. Truth was only the beginning. Fire in the blood. The sun of Xanthara did not rise gently. It burned through the ash-choked skies like a warning. The red light fell across the alien city of Vieltor, where silence had replaced laughter. The human had passed the trial of fire. No one had done that in 800 years, and now the sword was no longer silent. It pulsed once every hour, faint, but growing. Jack Ryker stood high on a cliff, overlooking the valley below. A new robe covered his body, given to him by the elders, half honor, half warning. The crystal shard he earned from the fire now hung from a chain around his neck. It glowed softly, warm against his chest. He hadn't slept, because something had changed. He could feel the sword, breathing, watching, waiting. Behind him, General Avara approached. "You are being watched from every window," she said. "Some hope you rise. Most hope you fall." Jack didn't turn around. "What's the next trial?" She stepped closer. "Ice. But not just cold memory. It strips everything away until only the truth remains." He frowned. "Did anyone else reach this trial?" "One," she said quietly. He walked in and never walked out. Jack finally looked at her. What happened? He froze in front of his own truth. They led him beyond the city, past the molten rivers, past the fields of ash, toward a forgotten canyon of glass and snow. The air changed. It became silent. Too silent. Jack's breath turned white. The light bent strangely here, and the path under his feet seemed to vanish the moment he stepped forward. Ahead stood a silver arch, half buried in snow. Beyond it, the frozen trial waited. Inside was a cave made of pure crystal. Its walls reflected everything like mirrors, but not just mirrors of his face. The reflections changed. He saw himself as a child, then as a soldier, then as the man who walked away when others needed him most. Jack swallowed hard, his hands clenched. This isn't real. But the cold only deepened, and the mirrors began to speak. "You left them behind. You were afraid. You will fail." The voice of the sword returned, but different now, softer, older. "Who are you beneath the armor?" Jack dropped to his knees. The cold reached into his bones. His vision blurred. He saw his mother, the moment she died. He had been across the galaxy. He hadn't made it in time. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The cold stopped. A single drop of water fell from the crystal ceiling. Then another. The mirrors faded, and a path appeared ahead, lit by a faint, blue flame. Jack stood. The shard around his neck now glowed brighter. He walked forward. At the center of the crystal cave was a frozen lake. In the ice was a figure, tall, armored, unmoving, eyes closed, skin blue. It was the last being who attempted the trial, frozen mid-step, still holding a sword that was not real. Jack stared down, then heard the voice again. Not strength, not speed, just truth. He knelt before the frozen warrior and whispered, "You were brave, but not honest." He placed his hand on the ice. The marks on his arm burned, and the ice cracked. The frozen warrior vanished into light. The sword's hum returned, louder. Jack stood, and behind him the exit appeared, carved from pure light. He walked through it, his body steaming from the cold. Back outside, the priestess waited. Her eyes widened. She saw the second shard in Jack's hand, this one shaped like a tear. "You survived ice." He said nothing, just walked past her. The ground beneath the sword cracked again. This time the entire stone circle shook, and the sword's glow changed from blue to white. The council fell to silence. Whispers spread like wildfire. "He's awakening the blade. The last trial is next. If he passes, we cannot stop him." But Jack didn't care about their fear. The sword had called him, and now it was ready for the final test, not of strength, not of truth, but of sacrifice. Truth beneath the ice. The wind on Xenthara had changed. It no longer carried heat or ash. It carried questions. Why did the sword glow for the human? Why did the trials let him pass? And what would the sword do if he succeeded in the final one? In the highest temple tower, the priestess watched from her dark window, her hand trembling slightly over an ancient scroll. "This cannot happen," she whispered to herself. The sword was never meant for them. Behind her, a shadow stepped out of the dark. "The final trial is tomorrow. Do you wish me to stop him?" She didn't answer right away. Then softly, "No, let the sword reject him." But her voice lacked certainty, because deep inside even she knew the sword was no longer asleep. Far from the tower, Jack Ryker sat alone beneath the glowing moons, staring at the white shard he had won from the trial of ice. It now floated above his palm. The symbols on his skin had finished their journey. They formed a complete circle over his chest like a seal. He felt the sword humming inside his bones. It no longer whispered. It spoke. And tonight, it spoke just 3 words. One more step. At sunrise, the sky turned gold. Not the gold of warmth, but the gold of warning. The trial of sacrifice was different. There was no cave, no arena, just a long bridge made of black glass, stretching over a bottomless canyon. At the center of the bridge stood a stone altar. Upon it rested the sword itself. It had moved from its circle on its own, waiting, glowing, calling. Jack stepped onto the bridge. He didn't wear armor, just a plain robe. He walked slowly, his heartbeat matching the sword's pulses. Halfway across, a figure fell from the sky. Not an enemy, a child, an alien girl, no older than 6. Her skin was pale purple, her legs cut and bleeding. She cried out, terrified, lost. Jack ran forward and caught her before she slid off the glass. The bridge shook. Then a voice echoed in the air, not the sword's voice this time, but something darker. One must fall. Jack looked up. From the clouds above, 3 dark shapes appeared. Flying machines, military design, unmarked, saboteurs. From the city. They fired. The bridge exploded behind him. Jack shielded the child with his body and rolled across the glass. Though, girl sobbed. The sword still waited, just ahead. But the bridge was cracking, he couldn't carry both. The voice of the sword whispered, "You must choose. Come alone, or save the weak." Jack froze. He could make it to the sword in seconds. He had earned it. He had bled for it. But the girl, she wouldn't survive without him. He looked down. Her eyes were wide, trusting. She gripped his robe, like it was the last thing she had. Jack closed his eyes, breathed once, then picked her up and turned away from the sword. He ran back toward the burning half of the bridge, dodging fire, sliding under beams, falling once, catching himself again. The sword's light behind him dimmed slightly, but then it flared, a light so bright the sky itself turned white. The machines above paused. The sword, without being touched, rose into the air. It flew across the bridge and landed in Jack's hand. The glass didn't break. The canyon didn't fall. The sky went silent, and the sword pulsed only once, then settled. Jack stared at it in disbelief. The blade was weightless, warm, and perfectly still. The girl clung to him, safe in his arms. He didn't speak, didn't raise the sword. He simply held it, and understood. The sword had never wanted a conqueror. It had waited all this time for someone who would walk away from it, for the right reason. High in the city tower, the priestess fell to her knees. "The sword has chosen," she whispered. All across Xenthara, bells rang. The blade of destiny had risen, and now belonged to a human. The sword that chose the human, the blade of destiny, had not just chosen, it had awakened. Across the galaxy, sensors blinked without reason. Ancient ruins began humming again. Faraway planets recorded strange pulses through space, matching one exact rhythm, the human's heartbeat. On Xenthara, the bridge no longer shook. It stood still, silent under the rising sun. Jack Ryker stood at its edge, the alien child held close to his chest, and the sword glowing bright in his hand. The fire of the blade danced quietly, not burning, but alive. Not just a weapon, a witness. Jack didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply looked at the girl, now asleep from exhaustion, and whispered, "We're okay." Behind him, dozens of alien warriors approached, weapons raised, unsure whether to kneel or attack. General Avara stepped forward first. She looked at the sword, then at Jack. "I watched this blade deny emperors," she said. "I saw it ignore heroes and gods." She dropped to one knee. "And now, it follows you." The rest of the warriors hesitated. Then one by one they dropped their weapons and followed her lead. Even the priestess, her face pale and unreadable, lowered her head. But Jack didn't raise the sword high. He didn't declare himself king or savior. He said only 3 words. "Find her family." He handed the child to Avara and turned toward the edge of the bridge. The sword stayed in his hand, not pulled, not forced. It had bonded to his spirit. That day, the city of Veltor changed. The sacred laws were rewritten. The stone circle once guarded by elites was opened to all species. Not to try lifting the sword because it no longer stood there, but to remember the lesson. Worth is not shown in power, but in protection. Jack stayed on Xenthara for a time, not to rule, but to help rebuild, to bring food to orphans, to teach young aliens how to fix broken machines, to smile at guards who once mocked him. The sword never left his back, but he never used it, because it was no longer about lifting it. It was about earning it every day. Legends spread across systems. Stories changed. A warrior failed. A king fell. But the human knelt, and the sword finally rose. One evening, the high priestess came to Jack holding an old scroll. This was written by the first keeper of the sword, she said. He unrolled it. Inside was a picture. Strange being, not alien, not machine, kneeling before the sword. A human. Jack looked at her. "You had this the whole time?" "We thought it was myth," she admitted. "We were wrong." Jack traced the drawing with his hand and smiled. Later, as the sun dipped behind Xenthara's silver mountains, Jack sat alone beside a quiet lake. The sword rested in the grass beside him. It no longer glowed wildly, only gently, like a fire that no longer needed to roar, and Jack said softly, "I wasn't supposed to be here." The sword answered with a tiny hum. "You were exactly where you needed to be." And far above the sky, in places untouched for centuries, other ancient weapons, silent for eons, began to flicker to life. Because the sword had chosen, and now, others were waking up. The galaxy had a new kind of hero, not the strongest, not the smartest, but the one who would choose a child's life over a crown of power.